In a nation founded to escape the grip of kings, America once, paradoxically, crowned one of its own, not with gold and jewels, but with immense, unchecked power. His name was Andrew Jackson, the seventh president. But to his fiercest critics, he was known by a more monarchical title, King Andrew I. As the echoes of No King's movements rise again in our modern political landscape, the story of Jackson feels less like a dusty chapter in a history book and more like a stark, urgent warning echoing through the corridors of time. So, how did a man who styled himself the champion of the common folk come to be depicted in cartoons wearing a crown and royal robes? The journey of Andrew Jackson is a quintessential American story of ascent. From a log cabin in the Carolinas to the pinnacle of power in Washington, D.C., he was a war hero, the victor of the Battle of New Orleans. A man whose rugged, frontier persona resonated with a growing electorate that felt ignored by the coastal elites. He promised to be their voice, to fight for the farmer, the laborer, the everyday man, against the corrupting influence of money and entrenched power. And in 1828, they sent him to the White House to do just that. But the intoxicating nature of power can alter even the most resolute of men. The Andrew Jackson who entered the presidency was not the same one who left it. The man who once fought for the people began to rule, not as a servant of democracy, but as its master. His vision of a government for the common man became a government subject to his personal will. He wielded the presidential veto, not as a constitutional tool for checks and balances, but as a weapon to smite his political enemies and dismantle institutions he personally despised. One of his most famous battles was against the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson saw it as a monstrous institution, a tool of the wealthy elite that held the common man in its financial grip. To his supporters, his war on the bank was a heroic crusade. He was David fighting Goliath, slaying the beast of financial corruption. But to his opponents, it was a reckless act of personal vengeance against the bank's president, Nicholas Biddle, an act that destabilized the nation's economy and plunged it into financial chaos. Jackson famously declared, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." And he did, ignoring economic advisors and constitutional scholars alike, driven by a conviction that his will was the will of the people. This belief in his own infallible judgment reached its most tragic and devastating climax in his policy toward Native Americans, when the Supreme Court, in the case of Worcester v. Georgia ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign entity and that Georgia had no right to impose its laws upon them. Jackson's response was one of defiant contempt. He allegedly retorted, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now, let him enforce it." He proceeded to sign the Indian Removal Act of 1830, setting in motion the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in the Southeast. This brutal march, which resulted in the deaths of thousands from disease, starvation, and exposure, is forever etched in history as the Trail of Tears. It was an act of ethnic cleansing carried out under the banner of presidential authority, a dark stain on the nation's conscience. The King Andrew caricature wasn't just a political insult. It was a genuine reflection of the fear that many Americans had about Jackson's expansion of executive power. He fired hundreds of government officials and replaced them with his loyal followers, pioneering what became known as the spoils system. He believed the presidency was the only office that represented all the people, and therefore, his authority superseded that of Congress or the courts. His supporters saw this as bold, decisive leadership. They cheered his strength and his willingness to break with convention. But his critics saw a tyrant in the making, a man who trampled on the Constitution and ruled by decree. The Whig Party, his main opposition, even named themselves after the British party that had opposed the king's power. Andrew Jackson's face is still on our $20 bill, a daily reminder of this complex and controversial figure. He was a man of profound contradictions, a champion of the common white man who was also a brutal slave owner and the architect of a national tragedy. He expanded democracy for some while, violently suppressing the rights of others. He reshaped the presidency, forging it into a far more powerful institution than the founders had perhaps ever envisioned. And this brings us back to the present. The story of King Andrew serves as a crucial lesson. It reminds us that the lines between a strong leader and an autocrat can be perilously thin. America swore it would have no kings. Yet, history shows that once, power nearly crowned itself in the Oval Office. The critical question for us today isn't just about what happened 200 years ago. It's about whether we can recognize the signs when they reappear, and whether we have the will to ensure that the crown of absolute power never returns. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into history compelling, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that connect the past to our present. We'd love to have you with us.